I still don't know whether telling this is confession or warning. Maybe both. Maybe I waited too long to understand the difference. What happened out there in the Appalachian backcountry did not begin the night something circled my fire. It began weeks earlier, when I made the decision to stay after every sensible part of me knew I should have packed up and walked out. I lost more than gear out there. I lost the version of myself that believed the woods were empty when human voices fade. If you listen to this thinking I'm building toward a campfire ghost story, I need you to understand I am telling you about a mistake that kept breathing after I made it. I heard something in those hills that should not have been there. I saw tracks I still cannot explain. And the worst part is, when I first realized something had found my camp, part of me had already started expecting it. I had gone into the Appalachian forest because I wanted to disappear for a while, though I dressed it up as a solo backcountry challenge. I told people it was for the quiet, for the distance, for proving I could still be alone without feeling lonely. That last part was a lie, though I did not admit it then. My life had narrowed into routines that made me feel hollow. Work, sleep, cheap food, conversations that meant nothing. I kept thinking if I went far enough into old timber and ridge lines, maybe something inside me would settle. The mountains have a way of making foolish ideas sound noble. The place I chose sat beyond a broken service road, past a creek crossing, and a long rise through hemlock and laurel, so dense the daylight felt bruised beneath it. It was the kind of country where sound traveled strangely. A woodpecker could seem right beside you and half a mile away at the same time. I found a clearing near a game trail and pitched my camp beside a fallen oak, silvered with age. It felt right. That is how I thought of it. Not practical, not strategic, right. The first days were almost peaceful. I made coffee over coals, watched fog slide through the trees at dawn, heard coyotes at night, and felt almost comforted by their noise. I laughed once at myself for jumping when a raccoon nosed at my pack. That was the last easy laugh I remember having out there. But little things began to shift. My firewood stack moved. Not much, enough that I noticed. Then I found a flat, dark stone placed beside my cookpot I did not remember picking up. I turned it over in my hand, too long, bothered in a way I couldn't name. I should have thrown it away and forgotten it. Instead, I set it back down where I found it, almost like I was answering something. At night, I started hearing footfalls beyond the firelight, slow ones, not deer stepping light and quick, heavier, deliberate. I called out once, thinking another hiker had wandered near. No answer, only the sound stopped when I spoke. I should have left then. But the mind does a dangerous thing in isolation. It normalizes what should alarm it. I made explanations because explanations are easier than fear. Bears, wind, fatigue, echoes. The hills play tricks. Then I found tracks in damp soil beside the game trail. Too long for a man, too narrow for a bear. Impressions like elongated toes pressed deeper than the heel. I crouched over them until the light thinned, and while I studied them, I had the unmistakable feeling something was studying me back. That night I dreamed something stood beyond the tent, listening to me breathe. Before dawn I woke because I thought I heard my name spoken low outside the nylon. Just once. When I stepped out, there were fresh prints circling the fire pit. Not passing by, circling. I almost left that morning. My pack was half loaded. I remember tightening a strap and looking toward the trees, trying to decide whether fear was warning me or humiliating me. Then I made the mistake that started everything. I let curiosity put on the mask of courage. I unpacked. I stayed. And by staying, I invited the next thing closer. The days after that took on a different feeling, like the forest had started watching me back. I moved through routines, but every task carried tension beneath it. I gathered water from the creek and kept checking over my shoulder. I cut more wood than I needed because keeping my hands busy calmed me. Yet something else happened too, something harder to admit. I began forming a relationship with the unseen presence, though I would never have used that word then. I started noticing signs I took personally. A dead rabbit left near camp, untouched by scavengers. Branches bent in odd markers along the trail I used to reach the creek. Once I found my metal cup, 20 feet from where I had left it, upright, clean, as if placed there. Every rational thought told me coincidence or my own forgetfulness, but another part of me felt addressed. That is how attachment begins in strange situations, not through trust, through repeated contact with the unknown. I spoke out loud one evening while stirring beans over the fire. "If you're there, show yourself." I meant it as a joke, a nervous one. But after I said it, from deep among the trees came a sound unlike any coyote, wolf, or feral dog I have heard before or since. It was almost a bark dragged through something human. It made my skin tighten so hard it hurt. I did not sleep much that night. Yet by morning, fear had mixed with fascination. I started following disturbances, broken saplings, fresh impressions in mud, a musky smell appearing with no clear source, wet fur mixed with rot. I told myself I was tracking an animal. Maybe I believed it. Maybe I wanted to. One afternoon I found hair caught on rough bark at shoulder height, higher than seemed possible for any black bear rubbing through. Coarse, dark, longer than canine fur. I wrapped it in paper and tucked it into my journal, as if preserving evidence made me safer. What unsettled me most was how the forest around camp changed. Birds would go silent all at once, not gradually, as if a switch flipped. Then I would feel that pressure again, the sense of being observed. Once I turned so fast I slipped, because I was certain something had stepped directly behind me. Nothing was there, yet the smell lingered. And still, there were moments almost tender in their strangeness. I woke one dawn to find my food bag, which I had hung badly, lowered but unopened, resting against the fallen oak. No torn canvas, no claw marks, just lowered. It felt impossible. It felt intentional. Against all sense, some part of me interpreted it as restraint. That is what I mean by attachment. Fear had not gone away. It had grown complicated. Then I found the deer carcass, beyond camp in a hollow, opened in a way I still struggled to describe, wrong. And beside it in soft earth were clearer versions of those long prints, circling, overlapping, waiting. I remember whispering, "What are you?" And from uphill came one branch snap. Just one, heavy enough that I knew something large shifted weight. I backed away slowly and returned to camp, shaking. For the first time, I understood whatever was near me was not simply observing. And that night, while staring into coals, I heard breathing just beyond the reach of the fire. Slow, patient, close enough that I could hear moisture in it. I did not turn around for several seconds, because I already knew, if I looked, something might finally be there. The first time I almost saw it, I convinced myself I hadn't. That is important. Denial kept me there. I was feeding the fire near dusk, when movement crossed between two trunks uphill. Too tall for a man moving naturally through brush. Lean, dark, wrong in proportion. It passed so fast my mind rejected it before fear fully landed. I stood there gripping a stick like a weapon, and laughed once. Dry, empty. Told myself shadow. Told myself fatigue. But my pulse kept hammering long after. After that, hope and denial lived side by side. I considered hiking out daily. Then daylight would come, and the ordinary tasks of survival made leaving feel like overreaction. That is how danger seduces. It lets you keep pretending you still have time. I started sleeping with the fire larger. I hung metal tins on line around camp as noise alarms. I kept my flashlight in hand, even to relieve myself at night. Yet even as I took precautions, another part of me believed maybe I had crossed some invisible threshold with the thing out there. That maybe if I did not provoke it, I could coexist. I know how that sounds. There was one night rain moved in, hard, cold, and slanting. The kind that turns every leaf into whispering static. In that storm I heard pacing outside the tent. Not imagined. Measured steps through wet ground. Around me, then stopping near my head. I held my breath so long my chest hurt. Something pressed lightly against the tent wall. Not clawing. Pressing. I could make out a shape deforming the nylon. Higher than any bear should reach from that angle. Then a voice, or something close enough to freeze blood, made a sound almost like a person trying to imitate a person. I did not move until daylight. In the mud outside were tracks, and one hand-like impression with elongated fingers. I stared at it until nausea came over me. That should have ended it, but fear can make people stupid in a different direction. I did not flee. I became determined to understand, as if understanding could protect me. I set up crude perimeter markers. I marked prints. I even sat awake one evening with the fire low, thinking maybe if it approached I could finally see what had been circling my life out there. What I did not understand was the thing had already begun changing my judgment. Then, returning from the creek at sunset, I found something hanging from a branch over my camp. It was my own red bandana, the one I had lost 3 days before, tied in a knot I had not made. Below it, fresh tracks leading not away from camp, but into the darkness behind my tent. That was the moment the bond I had imagined with the unseen started cracking into something much older than fear. Because I realized something I had not let myself think before. It wasn't wandering past me. It knew where I slept. And that night, for the first time, I heard something move behind the tent after I was already inside. Once you know you are being approached, every sound becomes accusation. Every silence feels loaded. I moved through the next days like a man trying not to admit he is already hunted. Food began disappearing in small amounts. A strip of dried meat gone. A tin shifted. My knife missing for hours, then found stuck point down in a stump beside camp. I cannot prove I had not placed it there absent-mindedly. That uncertainty was its own torture. I stopped wandering far. The forest that had seemed refuge felt arranged against me. Laurel thickets looked like hiding places. Hollows looked like mouths. And still there were moments I betrayed myself with denial. I would tell myself maybe a person was messing with me, some feral squatter, some sick prank. Human explanations, however ugly, felt preferable. Then one afternoon, I heard something mimic me. I coughed while chopping wood. A few seconds later, from timber downhill, came a rough, broken sound shaped like my cough. I stood still so long my legs trembled. That was when cracks formed in whatever story I'd been using to survive mentally. Anxiety turned physical. I stopped eating much. My hands shook. I smelled that musky rot, even when wind shifted the wrong direction for it. Sometimes I thought I caught movement pacing parallel beyond sight while I walked. Never fully seen, always implied. One evening near dark, I heard whimpering like an injured dog. It came from beyond the game trail. Against every instinct, I followed a little way, calling softly. The sound stopped. Then from much closer, directly behind me, something exhaled. I ran to camp without dignity, crashing through brush, dropping half my gathered wood. That night I heard circling again, faster this time, not slow, measured pacing, agitated movement, and once, unmistakably, a low growl that rolled into something almost like a laugh. I finally decided I would leave at first light, but before dawn, something struck one of my hanging tins. Clang! Then another farther around camp. Clang! Like something testing the perimeter I had made. I sat gripping my knife until my knuckles ached. When sunrise came, I found one of the tins twisted nearly flat. The decision to leave came too late, because by then leaving meant crossing miles of forest while something already understood my patterns. I packed in panic, hands fumbling, gear half secured. Then I found tracks beside my boots, fresh, overlapping my own prints from minutes before. That was impossible. Fear became something cleaner then, not unease, not dread, survival. I started down the trail fast, pack heavy, glancing back too often. For a while, nothing happened. Only woods, only my breathing. I almost believed I had broken free. Then I heard footsteps matching mine off to the right. When I sped up, they sped up. When I stopped, silence. And when I looked into the trees, I saw two pale reflections blink once at a height no animal should have been standing. I made the mistake of leaving the trail, thinking I could lose whatever paralleled me. Instead, I moved into rougher ground. Rhododendron choking sight lines, rocks slick with old moisture. That is where I saw it clearly. Across a narrow draw, maybe 30 yards off, stood something upright among the trunks. Tall, lean, head shaped wrong for a man, ears high, or maybe points of fur. Arms too long, chest narrow. The face. I still avoid remembering the face. It watched me. Not animal blankness, attention. Then it stepped behind a tree and vanished with a speed that felt unreal. I should have run harder. Instead, I froze, morally split in a way I struggled to explain. Some part of me felt I had trespassed, felt I had participated in whatever had developed between us. Fear mixed with guilt. That conflict nearly killed me, because while I stood there, something moved behind me. I turned as weight hit me from the side. Not the creature, a deer crashing blind in terror. It bolted past, and from somewhere ahead came a roar so violent birds exploded upward in a cloud. I ran. I abandoned half my gear, fell twice, tore my palms bloody. At some point I realized I was no longer heading for the service road, but back toward camp by accident. Looping in panic, the woods had turned me around, and when I burst into my clearing again, the tent was shredded. Not ripped like storm damage, opened, as if something had gone looking inside. That was the moment moral conflict ended. I knew coexistence had been fantasy. I knew I had been treated, perhaps for days, as something between curiosity and prey. I had one desperate idea left: fire. I fed the pit until flames climbed high, dragged green branches to smoke thick, stayed near that light as darkness gathered. Then from the tree line, two reflective eyes caught fire glow and began moving closer, slow, measured, like they had no reason to hurry. I shouted into the dark, threats, please. I do not know. Then it circled left, then right, testing. And I understood something with sick clarity. It wasn't afraid of me. It was learning me. Then from behind the fallen oak, where nothing had been a second earlier, I heard a voice, or something close enough to make my blood turn cold. My own voice, whispering, stay. Climax does not arrive like in movies. It comes as chaos, fragments your mind preserves badly. I remember those eyes first, low, then rising as the thing straightened. I remember a shape pacing the edge of firelight, refusing full entry. I shouted nonsense at it. Threats. Please. Then it rushed. Not all the way into flame, but fast enough to scatter sparks as it lunged near the pit. I swung a burning branch. It recoiled with a sound that shook my ribs. I saw teeth. I saw a muzzle, or something like one. And I saw, horribly, intelligence in the way it tested distance. The struggle became desperate action stripped of thought. I threw embers, fed flames, backed toward the fallen oak. Then my camp lantern tipped. Fuel caught. Fire spread through dry litter faster than I understood. For one terrible second, the clearing flashed bright as day. And in that brightness, I saw the whole creature. Too tall, rib-thin, dark fur slick in patches, hands too human, eyes reflecting not like a dog's, but deeper. Then smoke swallowed everything. The creature lunged, or maybe the fire surged. I felt impact, pain at my shoulder. I stabbed blindly with my knife. I do not know if I hit it. I ran through smoke while flames climbed brush behind me. And here is the loss I carry. In fleeing, I left the path where I had stashed most of my supplies. My journal, my evidence, all of it. I also led fire down slope. By dawn, a section of forest burned black. I reached the service road half delirious and collapsed. Search volunteers found me hours later. I told little. Who would believe it? Officials called the burn accidental. My shoulder wounds were written off as branches and falls. But one rescuer, older man from those hills, looked at me too long when I mentioned hearing something mimic me. He said only, "You stayed after it marked you," then walked away. I never found out what he meant, but that wasn't the part that hollowed me. It was what I remembered later. During the fire, just before I ran, I looked back once, and the thing was not retreating from the flames. It was standing still, watching me leave, as if it already knew I would carry it out of those woods with me. Loss was not only what happened in the clearing, it was what followed. Sleep left me, relationships thinned. I distrusted forests, then silence, then my own memory. Aftermath has a numbness worse than terror. Terror is alive. Numbness is slow burial. For months I convinced myself trauma had distorted everything. Hallucination layered onto bare encounters and isolation. That explanation almost saved me. Then I found mud dried in the tread of boots I had never fully cleaned. Pressed in one flake was part of an elongated print, unlike any I knew. I threw the boots away. Guilt settled deeper over the fire, over whatever animal life died because I turned panic into blaze, over staying when I should have left at the first warning, over the possibility that by interacting, speaking, responding, I crossed boundaries I did not understand. Sometimes I think the worst thing was not being hunted. It was recognizing I had, for a time, wanted contact. That shames me. Years later I returned only once, not to the same exact clearing, but near enough to feel old sickness rise. Burn scars had long faded beneath regrowth. The forest looked innocent. That offended me. As I stood there, wind moved through hemlock exactly as before. Same whisper, same cold memory in the smell of damp earth. And I noticed on a nearby trunk 3 vertical gouges weathered but deep. Maybe bare, maybe not. I left without touching them. But driving out, I looked in the rearview mirror and had the absurd certainty something had watched me leave a second time. Reflection is a haunted kind of acceptance. I do not know whether people call what I encountered a dogman because it is real, or because naming terror makes it easier to pass around. I only know something found my camp when I stayed too long alone in those mountains, and I think it began noticing me long before I noticed it. If there is a lesson, It is not some folklore warning about monsters in woods. It is about thresholds, about the moment unease first speaks, and you answer by lingering. I crossed that threshold repeatedly, ignored moved stones, ignored circling tracks, ignored the press against my tent, ignored the way curiosity dressed itself as courage. That was the irreversible consequence, not the night of fire, every smaller yes before it. And just when I had nearly convinced myself the story ended there, I received something in the mail with no return address. The envelope was plain. No handwriting I recognized, no note. Just a single photograph folded once, old trail camera print, grainy, date stamp corrupted. At first I thought it showed random timber. Then I saw the clearing, my clearing, the fallen oak, the black ring where the fire pit had been, and tied to a branch above it, a red bandana. Mine. My hands started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the photo. But that was not the worst part. Near the edge of the frame, half obscured beyond the fire ring, stood something tall, upright, watching the camera, watching whoever set it, watching me now. I burned that photograph the same night, fed it to the sink with a match, and watched the edges curl black. It did not help, because what haunted me was not proof. It was implication. Who placed that camera? Who mailed me the print? And why did the thing in the frame look, even through grain, as if it was standing exactly where it had stood the night of the fire? That reopened every question I had buried. Maybe the old rescuer knew more than he said. You stayed after it marked you. I kept hearing those words, marked, as if the circling prints, the moved objects, the mimicry, had not been random behavior, but stages. I started remembering details I had pushed down, how often it seemed to approach only after I answered it, how the boundary between observing and interacting had shifted because I kept responding, how I had mistaken restraint for recognition. And then one memory surfaced that I had withheld, even from myself. When I collapsed near the road before rescuers found me, I woke once to movement in brush, forced my eyes open, and saw a shape at the weeds, watching, not approaching, watching, then slipping back into timber. For years I called that delirium. I do not anymore, because if the photograph proved anything, it was that something remained tied to that place, and maybe to me. Now sometimes late at night, I wake certain I hear pacing beyond walls. Sometimes in crowded places I catch a wet fur rot smell that vanishes when I turn. Once, while coughing alone in my apartment, I stopped because I thought I heard an answering cough from the hallway. I did not open the door. I never opened the door. But a week later, outside my apartment building after rain, I saw a track in soft mud beside the curb. Too long for a man, too narrow for a dog, with impressions like elongated toes pressed deeper than the heel. And beside it, one print from a boot tread, my size, walking parallel. I have told myself every explanation, hoax, trauma, pattern-seeking, madness shaped by isolation. If I were listening to me, I would want one of those to be true. Maybe one is. But age has made me suspicious of the stories we tell ourselves to survive, especially the comforting ones, because comfort kept me in those woods too long. Comfort said the moved stones meant nothing. Comfort said the circling tracks were misread. Comfort said the voice at the tent was wind. Comfort said I still had time. That is why I am telling you this now. Not because I expect belief, because warnings do not require belief to matter. Only attention. If you ever find yourself alone somewhere, old enough to keep its own silence, and something begins noticing you back, leave. Leave at the first wrongness. Leave at the moved object, the unexplained print, the sound that stops when you speak. Do not stay long enough to let curiosity begin translating fear into invitation. Do not confuse being tolerated with being understood. Do not make the mistake I made. Because I think there are thresholds some places keep, and once crossed, something crosses back. There is one final thing. I almost did not say it, but withholding it feels like repeating the same cowardice. 3 nights ago, before I decided to tell this publicly, I woke at 2:13 to a soft metallic sound. Clang. I sat upright in bed, listened. Then again, clang. From outside. My stomach turned cold because I knew that sound before I placed it. Metal striking metal, like those hanging tins around my camp. I went to the window, very slowly, pulled the curtain aside. Parking lot below, wet from rain. Empty, except near the far edge by the tree line behind the building. Something stood under the security light's reach. Too far to see clearly. Tall. Still. Watching the building. I do not know how long I stood there. At some point, the motion light cut off. Darkness covered that edge, and when the light came back, nothing was there. In the morning, I went outside. I should have stayed in, but I went. Near the back lot where mud held the rain, I found 3 impressions. Not full tracks, partial, deep. And tied to the chain-link fence, moving in the wind, was a strip of faded red cloth. I did not touch it. I walked back inside, locked the door, and started recording this. So if you ask whether I believe the Dogman found my camp, yes. But that is the wrong question. The question that keeps me awake is whether it ever stopped following after I left. Because sometimes, just before sleep, I think I hear slow footfalls beyond my door. Then silence, as if something is waiting for me to answer. And some nights, I'm not sure which side of the door I am more afraid of. There is only one reason I kept going after that. Because once I started recording this, something inside me understood the story was not finished. It was circling back, like those tracks around the fire, like everything that happened out there moved in loops. The longer I have lived with it, the less I think the haunting is only external. Something followed me. Yes, but something also stayed in me. That may be worse, because creatures, if that is what it was, belong to the world. But what they awaken in you, that can keep feeding itself. I think about the man who found me near the road. You stayed after it marked you. For years I heard that as folklore, as warning. Now I hear accusation. Because maybe being marked was not about scent or territory. Maybe it was about recognition. Maybe something in those woods responded to the part of me that came there wanting to disappear. That thought has troubled me more than claws or teeth ever did. That maybe the first thing it found was not my camp, but my emptiness. And maybe that is why I felt, in those early days, something almost like relationship. Not because it was benevolent, because predation sometimes begins with attention. There is a memory I return to often, the moved stone beside the cookpot. Small thing, meaningless maybe. But I think now that was the first threshold, a question. And every time I answered by staying, I answered yes. Yes to the tracks. Yes to the breathing beyond firelight. Yes to the voice at the tent. Yes to the whisper that said stay. People think tragedy is one catastrophic event. It rarely is. Usually it is a chain of permissions. That is my moral reckoning. Not that I met something monstrous, that I kept consenting to remain where I knew I should not. Acceptance is not peace. It is only the point where you stop lying about what shaped you. I accept I may never know what stood in those woods. I accept some listeners will decide isolation broke my mind. I accept memory distorts. But I also accept this. I am still afraid of certain silences for reasons imagination alone did not build. And I no longer try to force the story into ordinary categories. Some things resist that. Some experiences stay half wild, half unnamed. Haunted closure, if there is such a thing, comes in admitting the wound closes around the mystery rather than solving it. I have not been back. I will not go back. If that clearing still exists beneath regrowth, it can keep its secrets. But I sometimes imagine the fallen oak still there, the fire ring faint under leaves, and something moving past at dusk, pausing where my tent once stood. Remembering, that word again, remembering. I used to think memory belonged to humans. I am less certain. If you have listened this far, maybe you expect me to end with certainty, a final revelation, proof. I have none, only this confession. Sometimes in the hour before dawn, I wake and hear nothing at all. No pacing, no sounds, only stillness. And somehow that absolute stillness frightens me most, because it feels exactly like the forest used to feel a few seconds before something moved. That is when I think the same thought every time. Not please let it be over. Something stranger, something I hate admitting. I wonder whether, if I had not run through the fire, if I had stayed, what would have happened? That thought disgusts me, but it is there, the old curiosity, still alive. And maybe that is the last scar it left, not fear, temptation. So this is where I leave it. If you go alone into old mountains, respect the first wrong feeling. Do not romanticize endurance. Do not stay to understand what does not want understanding. And if, one night, you hear something beyond the edge of light imitate a sound you made, do not answer. Because I did. And sometimes I think my voice is still answering. Even now, while I sit here in a locked room, I can hear something, very faint, from the hallway. A soft scrape. Then, what sounds like breathing. I'm going to stop recording, because if there is one thing I have learned, it is that some stories end exactly when something outside the door decides to knock.